Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're building in Minecraft while we dive into a story that'll make your blood boil, then leave you deeply satisfied. Grab something warm to drink and settle in, because this one's a ride. Before we dive in, I want to give a big shout out to everyone who's been tuning in, leaving comments and supporting the channel. Seriously, thank you. Your energy is what keeps this community going. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and every single sub helps a ton. Our story begins with a guy who thought he was doing everything right. 2 years of building trust, respecting boundaries, and prioritizing connection. But behind his back, she was living a different life. When the truth came out, she didn't just deny it, she lashed out. I thought I was being a good partner. I really did. My girlfriend and I had been together for 2 years, and from the very beginning, she told me she wasn't ready for physical intimacy. She had some past trauma, some things she was working through, and she needed time. I got it. I respected that. I never once pressured her, never made her feel like she owed me anything. I figured we'd get there when she was ready, and in the meantime, we were building something real. An emotional connection. Trust. Or at least that's what I thought we were doing. We did everything else. We went on dates, we talked for hours, we planned a future together. She'd stay over at my place. We'd cook together, watch movies, fall asleep on the couch. It felt intimate in other ways. I told myself that physical stuff wasn't everything, that what we had was deeper than that. My friends would joke about it sometimes, ask me if I was frustrated, and yeah, of course I was human, but I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing. I loved her. I wanted her to feel safe with me. Then one night I came home early from a work trip. I wasn't supposed to be back until the next day, but we wrapped up ahead of schedule. I thought I'd surprise her. I texted her saying I'd be home soon, but she didn't reply. I didn't think much of it. When I got to my apartment, I heard voices inside. I opened the door and there she was, on my couch, with a guy from my office, a coworker I saw every single day. They weren't just talking, they were all over each other. I stood there for a second, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. She scrambled off the couch, started stammering excuses, but I wasn't even listening. The guy, my coworker, just grabbed his stuff and left without a word. Didn't even look at me. I asked her how long this had been going on. She tried to deny it at first, then she broke down and admitted it. 6 months. 6 months she'd been sleeping with him while telling me she wasn't ready for intimacy. 6 months of me respecting boundaries that apparently didn't exist for everyone else. I told her to leave. I didn't yell, I didn't throw things. I just asked her to get out of my apartment. She cried, begged me to let her explain, said it didn't mean anything, that she loved me. I didn't care. I was done. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd process this, move on, and eventually be okay. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 days later, I started getting messages. Friends asking if I was okay, if the accusations were true. I had no idea what they were talking about. Then someone sent me a screenshot. She'd posted on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. A long, emotional post about how she'd finally escaped an abusive relationship, about how I was controlling, manipulative, and sexually coercive. She painted herself as a survivor who'd finally found the courage to leave. She said I'd pressured her, guilted her, made her feel like she had no choice but to stay. None of it was true, not a single word. My phone exploded. People I'd known for years were sending me angry messages, calling me a monster, telling me they never wanted to speak to me again. My own family reached out, confused and worried, asking if there was any truth to what she was saying. My mum actually asked me if I'd hurt her. My mum. I tried to explain, tried to tell people what really happened, but no one wanted to hear it. She was the victim. I was the villain. That's how the story went. Then came the breaking point. My job called me in for a meeting. HR had received a formal complaint. She'd reported me for creating a hostile work environment and harassing a coworker. She claimed I'd been stalking her, showing up at her workplace, sending threatening messages. I worked in a completely different building. I hadn't contacted her once since she left my apartment. But it didn't matter. They put me on administrative leave pending an investigation. I was told not to come into the office, not to contact anyone from work, and that they'd be in touch. I sat in that HR office completely numb. My career, my reputation, everything I'd built was falling apart because of lies. I went home and I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. I barely ate. I didn't sleep. I just sat there trying to figure out how this had happened, how someone I loved could do this to me. But then something shifted. I got angry, not the explosive kind of angry, the cold, methodical kind. If she wanted to destroy me with lies, I was going to defend myself with the truth. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, back to how OP turned the tables with receipts that couldn't be ignored. I started gathering evidence, every text message from the last 2 years, every conversation where she told me she wasn't ready, where she thanked me for being patient, where she initiated the boundaries I'd respected. I had all of it. I went back through our entire relationship, screenshot by screenshot, and built a timeline. Then I reached out to my coworker, the guy she'd been sleeping with. I didn't expect him to respond, but he did. He was scared. He admitted everything over text. He told me she'd pursued him, that she'd lied to him too, told him we were barely together, that it was complicated. He didn't know she was posting about me online until I sent him the screenshots. He was horrified. He sent me a written confession, timestamps, everything. I compiled it all into a single document. A methodical, factual, evidence-backed response. I included her texts initiating our celibacy arrangement, my co-worker's confession with dates and details, and timestamps that proved her accusations were fabricated. I cross-referenced her claims with real events, showed where she'd lied, where the timeline didn't match up. Then I posted it. I didn't editorialize. I didn't call her names. I just let the evidence speak for itself. The response was immediate. People who'd called me a monster were now apologizing. Friends who'd blocked me were sending messages saying they were sorry, that they should have asked for my side. Her post started getting torn apart in the comments. People were asking her to explain the inconsistencies, to address the proof I'd provided. She tried to double down at first, said I was manipulating the narrative, that I'd fabricated the screenshots, but too many people had seen the original messages. Too many people knew the truth. Within a week, she deleted everything. Her Instagram post, her Twitter thread, all of it gone. She deactivated her accounts and disappeared. Mutual friends reached out to tell me she'd admitted to lying, that she panicked when I caught her and didn't know what else to do. Some of them apologized, some of them didn't. I appreciated the apologies, but honestly, the trust was gone. These were people who believed the worst about me without a single question. Work cleared me. The investigation concluded there was no evidence to support her claims, and I was reinstated. My coworker was transferred to a different department, and I heard through the grapevine that he quit a few months later. I went back to my job, but it wasn't the same. People looked at me differently, some with pity, some with lingering suspicion. The damage was done. Her story collapsed publicly, but mine didn't exactly recover. People remember accusations more than they remember retractions. I'm still dealing with the fallout. I've had job interviews go cold after a background check. I've had dates ghost me after Googling my name. The truth came out, but the stain doesn't just wash away. I don't regret defending myself. I couldn't let those lies stand, but I also learned something brutal. You can have all the evidence in the world, all the proof, all the timestamps and screenshots, and it still doesn't undo the damage. It just stops it from getting worse. Some people still think I did something wrong. Some people will always believe her version, no matter what I show them. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not the betrayal, not even the cheating. The fact that she almost got away with destroying me. And a part of her still did. I'm doing okay now. I moved to a different city, started over in a lot of ways. I'm more careful about who I trust, more guarded than I used to be. I hate that she changed me like that, made me cynical, but I also know it kept me safe. I posted my story on Reddit because I needed people to know what happened, needed to hear from others who'd been through something similar. The support helped. It reminded me I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the villain she tried to make me out to be. But the truth is, even with a happy ending, even with vindication, it still cost me, and I don't think I'll ever fully get back what I lost. My marriage had been falling apart for months, and I didn't know how to fix it. My husband, Mark, had become this distant, cold version of himself. We'd been together for 7 years, and suddenly it felt like I was living with a stranger. He'd come home late, barely look at me during dinner, and spend most nights locked in his office. I kept telling myself it was work stress, that we'd get through it like we always had. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit it. So I did what everyone says you're supposed to do when you're struggling. I went to therapy. I found Dr. Sarah Mitchell through my insurance network. She had great reviews, specialized in marriage counseling and individual therapy, and had this warm, reassuring presence that made me feel like maybe I could actually fix whatever was broken in me. Because that's what I thought, that I was the problem. That if I could just be better, more understanding, less needy, Mark would come back to me. Dr. Sarah was incredible at first. She listened to everything, every fear, every insecurity, every moment of doubt I had about my marriage. She helped me process feelings I didn't even know I had. She'd nod thoughtfully and say things like, "It sounds like you're carrying a lot of emotional weight that isn't yours to carry." Or, "Have you considered that Mark's distance might be his own issue, not a reflection of your worth?" It felt validating. It felt like progress. But here's the thing. While I was pouring my heart out to her every Tuesday at 4 o'clock, she was using everything I said against me. Every session became a blueprint for how to manipulate my husband and gaslight me into doubting my own reality. I just didn't know it yet. Mark's behavior got worse. He started picking fights over nothing. He'd accuse me of being paranoid when I asked where he'd been. He told me I was imagining problems that didn't exist. And the worst part? Dr. Sarah would echo the same things in our sessions. She'd gently suggest that maybe I was projecting my anxiety onto Mark, that maybe I needed to give him space, that my need for reassurance was pushing him away. I started to believe her. I started to think I was losing my mind. Then came the breaking point. Mark forgot to log out of his email on our shared laptop. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I opened it to check my own email, and his inbox was just sitting there. And right at the top was a message from someone named S. The preview line said, "Can't wait to see you tonight. She has no idea." My hands were shaking when I clicked it. The entire thread loaded, and my stomach dropped. Months of emails. Hundreds of them. And they weren't just from some random woman. They were from Dr. Sarah, my therapist, the person I'd trusted with my deepest fears and insecurities. I sat there reading through them, and it was like watching my entire life unravel in real time. They'd been seeing each other for 8 months. 8 months. The affair had started 2 weeks after my first therapy session with her. She'd used everything I told her to get closer to him. She knew his schedule because I'd mentioned it. She knew his favorite restaurants because I'd talked about date nights we used to have. She even knew about the cologne I bought him for his birthday because I'd told her I was trying to rekindle our intimacy. And the worst part? In the emails, she was laughing about it. She called me tragically clueless in one message. In another, she told Mark that I'd cried in session about feeling inadequate, and he replied, "Good, keeps her off our trail." I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I printed everything, every email, every text I could find on his phone while he was in the shower. I hired a private investigator to document them together, and within 3 days I had photos of them meeting at hotels, having dinner, walking into her condo together. The PI even caught them kissing in her car outside my husband's office building. I confronted Mark first. I laid the printed emails on the kitchen table and watched his face go white. He didn't even try to deny it. He just sat there, staring at the evidence like he couldn't believe he'd been caught. Then he got angry. He said I had no right to go through his email, that I'd violated his privacy, that I was obsessive and controlling. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I told him I wanted a divorce and that he needed to leave. He refused. He said it was his house too and I couldn't kick him out. So I left. I packed a bag and went to stay with my sister. The next day, I called Dr. Sarah's office and scheduled an emergency session. I wanted to confront her face to face. I wanted to see her try to justify what she'd done. When I walked into her office, she greeted me with that same warm smile she always had, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't spent the last 8 months destroying my marriage from the inside. I didn't sit down. I stood in the doorway and told her I knew about the affair. Her face changed instantly. The warmth disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look surprised. She just said very calmly, "I think you're experiencing a crisis, and we should talk about what's real and what's your anxiety manifesting. You almost have to admire the audacity." I told her I had proof, emails, photos, everything. She stared at me for a long moment, then said, "I'm going to have to terminate our therapeutic relationship. You're clearly in a state of distress, and I don't think I can help you anymore." I left. I thought that was the end of it. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 days later, I got a call from the state licensing board. Dr. Sarah had filed an ethics complaint against me. Against me. She claimed I'd been harassing her, showing up at her home, sending threatening messages, and exhibiting signs of severe psychological distress that made me a danger to myself and others. She'd submitted her session notes as evidence, and they were twisted beyond recognition. She'd rewritten my words to make me sound unstable, paranoid, delusional. Then it got worse. She petitioned for an emergency psychiatric evaluation. She wanted me committed. She used her credentials, her reputation, and her doctored notes to paint me as someone having a complete mental breakdown who needed to be hospitalized for my own safety. I was terrified. If she succeeded, I'd lose everything. My credibility, my job, my ability to fight for myself in the divorce. She was using the system to bury me, and she almost got away with it. That's when everything unraveled. For her, not me. I'd been recording everything since the moment I found out. Every phone call, every conversation, every interaction. I recorded my confrontation with her in her office. I had timestamps, metadata, everything. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in medical malpractice and ethics violations, and we built a case that was airtight. We filed a formal complaint with the state licensing board with evidence of the affair, proof that she'd used confidential session information to manipulate my husband, and recordings that showed she was retaliating against me for exposing her. We included the emails where she discussed details from my therapy sessions with Mark, which was a direct violation of doctor-patient confidentiality. The board launched an investigation. Dr. Sarah tried to double down. She submitted more falsified notes, claimed I was fabricating evidence, even tried to say the emails were fake. But the investigator pulled her phone records, her credit card statements, hotel bookings, everything. It all matched. The affair was undeniable. The ethical violations were undeniable. Within 6 weeks, Dr. Sarah lost her license, permanently. She can never practice therapy again in any state. The board published a formal censure, and her name is now flagged in every professional database. Her career is over, and here's where it gets absurd. The scandal made local news. A therapist having an affair with a patient's husband and then trying to weaponize her position to cover it up? That's a headline. Mark's employer found out. He worked in finance, and they have strict ethics clauses in their contracts. He was fired within days. His reputation in the industry is destroyed. I filed for divorce immediately. Mark tried to fight it, tried to claim I was being vindictive, but my lawyer buried him in discovery. We had everything. The affair, the financial records showing he'd been spending marital funds on hotels and gifts for Sarah, all of it. He didn't stand a chance. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. I got the house, the car, and a settlement that would keep me comfortable while I rebuild my life. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving someone enough rope to hang themselves. Dr. Sarah tried to sue me for defamation. That lawsuit lasted about 3 weeks before her lawyer dropped her as a client. You can't claim defamation when everything being said about you is true and provable. She's now facing a lawsuit from another former patient who came forward after seeing the news, claiming Sarah had an inappropriate relationship with her partner too. Turns out, I wasn't the first. I was just the first one who fought back. Mark is living in a studio apartment and working a job that pays half what he used to make. He tried to reach out a few months ago, said he wanted to apologize that he'd made a mistake. I didn't respond. There's nothing he could say that would matter. As for me, I'm doing better than I ever thought I would. I'm in therapy again with someone who's actually ethical and trustworthy. I've started advocating for stronger accountability laws for therapists, working with legislators to close loopholes that let people like Dr. Sarah operate unchecked for so long. I've connected with other survivors of therapist misconduct, and we're building something that might actually make a difference. It's been a long road, and I'm not going to pretend it hasn't been painful, but I'm free. I'm safe, and I made sure the people who tried to destroy me faced real consequences. That's enough for now. Speaking of people who hide behind professional masks, what happens when the sibling you've protected your whole life chooses your ex over you? I never thought my own sister would be the one to twist the knife, but here we are. When my ex-boyfriend cheated on me with someone we both knew, I ended things immediately. Clean break. No drama. I told my family what happened, cried it out with my mum, and started moving on with my life. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. My younger sister Emma had always gotten along with my ex. They had this weird buddy-buddy thing going on that I never really questioned because honestly I trusted both of them. But after the breakup, something shifted. She started defending him. Not privately, not in some misguided attempt to play peacemaker, but publicly. She'd post vague things on Instagram about how people are too quick to judge and how everyone makes mistakes. She'd comment on his posts with supportive messages. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe she just didn't want to take sides. Maybe she felt awkward cutting him off completely. Then she invited him to family dinner. I showed up at my parents' house on a random Tuesday, and there he was, sitting at the table like nothing had happened, laughing with my dad about fantasy football. Emma acted like it was no big deal. She said she thought enough time had passed and that I was being dramatic by still holding a grudge. Dramatic, that's the word she used. I didn't cause a scene, I just left. I texted her later and told her that was completely out of line, that she had no right to bring him into family spaces without even asking me. Her response was cold. She said I didn't get to control who she was friends with, and that I needed to grow up and get over it. That should have been my first clue that this wasn't just about her being naive. This was intentional. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. She started posting photos with him on social media, group hangouts, coffee dates, casual stuff that she knew I'd see. Every single post felt like a message aimed directly at me. My friends started asking me what was going on. My mom called me, confused, asking why Emma was spending so much time with him. I didn't have a good answer because I genuinely didn't understand it myself. I confronted Emma again. I told her she was hurting me, that this wasn't about forgiveness or moving on. It was about basic respect. She doubled down. She said I was trying to control her relationships and that I was being toxic and unforgiving. Toxic. Unforgiving. These were the words my own sister was using to describe me because I didn't want her parading my cheating ex around like some kind of redemption project. I felt insane. I started questioning myself. Was I overreacting? Was I being petty? But then I'd see another post, another family event where he was invited and I wasn't, and I'd remember that no, I wasn't crazy. She was choosing him over me, and she was doing it loudly. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that I knew something about Emma that no one else in our family knew. Something she'd begged me to keep secret years ago. When she was 24, she had an affair with her best friend's husband. It went on for months. She'd call me crying, conflicted, saying she didn't know how it happened but that she couldn't stop. I told her to end it, to come clean, to do the right thing. She didn't. She kept it going until the guy's wife found out on her own, and their whole life imploded. The fallout was brutal. Emma's best friend cut her off completely, obviously, and Emma spiraled. She came to me, sobbing, begging me not to tell our parents, not to tell anyone. She said she was ashamed, that she'd made a horrible mistake, and that she just needed time to figure herself out. I kept her secret. I covered for her when our parents asked why her best friend suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. I protected her because that's what sisters do, and now here she was, publicly humiliating me, calling me unforgiving, acting like I was the villain for not welcoming my cheating ex back into the family with open arms. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I warned her one more time. I sent her a long text message explaining how much she was hurting me, how disrespectful this all was, and how I needed her to stop. I didn't mention the affair. I didn't threaten her. I just asked her, as my sister, to please have my back. She left me on read. 2 days later, she posted another photo with my ex, this time at a party with mutual friends, captioned something about surrounding yourself with real ones. That's when I decided I was done protecting her. I'd carried her secret for years, sacrificed my own sense of justice to keep her reputation intact, and this was how she repaid me. I wasn't going to let her keep playing the moral authority while I stayed silent. So I waited. I didn't want to be impulsive. I wanted to make sure this was the right move, that I wasn't just acting out of spite. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She'd made her choice. Now I'd make mine. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The whole family was there. My parents, my older brother Emma, and her fiancé Kyle. Kyle was a good guy, someone who genuinely seemed to love her. And honestly, I felt bad for what was about to happen to him. But he deserved to know who he was marrying. We were halfway through dinner when my mom brought up wedding planning. Emma was glowing, talking about venues and color schemes, and everyone was so happy for her. I waited until there was a natural lull in the conversation, and then I just said it. I looked at Emma and said, "Do you want to tell everyone about what happened with Sarah's husband, or should I?" The table went silent. Emma's face drained of color. She stammered, asking me what I was talking about, trying to play dumb, but I didn't let her. I laid it all out. I told the whole family about the affair, about how she'd destroyed her best friend's marriage, about how she'd begged me to keep it secret, and how I'd protected her for years. I told them how she'd called me unforgiving and toxic, while she herself had done something objectively worse and never faced any consequences for it. My mum looked horrified. My dad just stared at Emma, waiting for her to deny it. She didn't. She couldn't. Kyle looked gutted. He asked if it was true, and Emma just started crying, saying it was a mistake from years ago and that it didn't matter anymore. But it did matter. It mattered to Kyle, who suddenly realized he didn't know the person he was about to marry. It mattered to my parents, who'd been lied to for years. It mattered to my brother, who'd always thought Emma was the golden child who could do no wrong. Then came the breaking point. Kyle stood up and left, just walked out without another word. Emma tried to follow him, but he wouldn't even look at her. She came back inside, screaming at me, calling me vindictive and cruel, saying I'd ruined her life. I told her she'd ruined it herself the moment she chose my ex over me. I told her I'd kept her secret because I loved her, and she'd repaid that loyalty by publicly humiliating me for months. I said I was done covering for her. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Kyle broke off the engagement 2 days later. My parents were furious with Emma, not just for the affair, but for lying to them for so long. My brother stopped talking to her altogether. She tried to turn it around on me, posting on social media about toxic family members and betrayal. But it didn't work. Too many people knew the truth now. Her friends started distancing themselves. The few who'd been on her side during my breakup suddenly went quiet. She couldn't play the victim anymore because everyone knew what she'd done. Within a month, she'd moved to another state. She said she needed a fresh start, but really, she just couldn't handle facing everyone anymore. I won't lie, I felt guilty. There were nights I'd lie awake wondering if I'd gone too far, if I'd destroyed my sister's life out of spite. But then I'd remember how she'd treated me, how she'd chosen my cheating ex over her own sister, how she'd called me toxic for setting boundaries, and the guilt would fade. She made her choices. I just stopped protecting her from the consequences. My family eventually came around. My mum apologized for not seeing how much Emma had hurt me. My dad said he was disappointed in both of us, but understood why I did what I did. My brother said Emma had it coming. As for Emma, we haven't spoken since. I don't know if we ever will. Part of me misses her, or at least misses the version of her I thought I knew. But I don't regret what I did. She wanted to act like she had the moral high ground while tearing me down, and I wasn't going to let that stand. Sometimes the truth is the only weapon you have left, and I used it. I feel guilty, sure, but I also feel liberated. I don't have to carry her secret anymore. I don't have to pretend everything's fine while she treats me like garbage. I'm free, and honestly, that's worth more than her forgiveness ever could be. Family loyalty can shatter in an instant, but sometimes the people who destroy you aren't blood. They're the ones signing your paychecks. I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me the way most people do these days. A mutual friend sent me a screenshot they probably shouldn't have. It was a text from him to someone named Jessica, and it was explicit enough that I didn't need any more context. I confronted him that night. He didn't even try to deny it, just shrugged and said things between us had been off for a while anyway. Like that justified it. I told him to pack his stuff and get out. He was gone by morning. The worst part? Jessica worked in my department, same floor, same team meetings. I saw her every single day. I'd worked with her for almost a year and never suspected anything. She was friendly, professional, always quick with a compliment or a joke in the break room. I had no idea she'd been sleeping with my boyfriend behind my back the entire time. When I saw her at work the next day, she smiled at me like nothing had happened. That smile made my stomach turn. I decided to handle it the mature way. I wasn't going to cause drama at work. I wasn't going to make a scene or let this affect my career. I ended the relationship, blocked him on everything, and told myself I'd move on. Professionally, I kept things civil with Jessica. I didn't ignore her, didn't ice her out, just kept it polite and minimal. I thought that was the end of it. I thought we'd both just move forward and pretend it never happened. I was wrong. About 2 weeks later, my manager pulled me aside after a team meeting. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be having this conversation. He told me there had been some concerns raised about my behavior. Concerns about me creating a hostile work environment. I had no idea what he was talking about. He said Jessica had approached him privately, said I'd been making her uncomfortable, giving her dirty looks, making passive-aggressive comments in meetings. None of it was true. I'd barely spoken to her, but he said he had to take it seriously and that he'd be keeping an eye on the situation. I was stunned. I went back to my desk and just sat there trying to process what had just happened. She was lying. She was actively lying to management about me, and there was nothing I could do about it. If I defended myself, I'd look defensive. If I brought up the affair, I'd look petty. I was trapped, and here's where it gets absurd. A week later, I was called into HR. Jessica had filed a formal complaint. She claimed I'd been harassing her, sending her threatening emails, following her to her car after work, making her feel unsafe. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd done none of those things. I asked to see the emails. They showed me printouts, messages from my work email address to hers, saying things like she should watch her back, that she'd regret what she did, that I wasn't going to let this go. The timestamps were from late at night after I'd left the office. I'd never sent those emails. I told them that. I told them I didn't write any of it, that someone was setting me up. They looked at me like I was making excuses. They put me on probation, effective immediately. I was told to have no contact with Jessica outside of necessary work communication, and that any further incidents would result in termination. I left that meeting shaking. I couldn't understand how this was happening. How had she sent emails from my account? How had she made this look so convincing? I felt like I was losing my mind. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how she'd pulled this off. And then it hit me. The emails were sent late at night, after hours. I went back through my own sent folder. Nothing. They weren't there, which meant they'd been deleted, or they were drafts that never actually sent. Or someone had accessed my computer when I wasn't there. The next morning I went to the office early. I found our IT guy before anyone else arrived and asked him if there was any way to check security footage for our floor. He said there was, but I'd need manager approval. I didn't have time for that. I told him I thought someone had accessed my computer without permission, and that I needed to see the footage before I took it to HR. He hesitated, but eventually he pulled it up. We scrubbed through hours of footage, and then we found it. 2 weeks ago. Jessica sitting at my desk long after I'd gone home. She was there for almost 30 minutes, typing, clicking, drafting emails she never sent, just saved in my drafts folder to make it look like I'd written them. She knew HR would check my account. She knew they'd find them. She'd planned the whole thing. I had the IT guy download the footage. I also went through my work email with him and found the drafts she'd saved. They were time-stamped to match the printouts she'd given HR. We pulled metadata showing when they were created and from which workstation, my computer. But I hadn't been in the building. The security footage proved it. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I logged into the company Slack and searched Jessica's messages. She'd been sloppy. She'd bragged to a friend from another department about what she was doing. Actual messages saying she was going to get me fired, that I deserved it for being in the way, that she was tired of seeing my face every day. She even joked about how easy it was to mess with someone's computer when they didn't log out properly. I took everything to HR, the footage, the metadata, the Slack messages. I walked in with a folder full of evidence and I didn't say a word until I'd laid it all out on the table. I watched their faces change as they realized what they were looking at. Jessica hadn't just lied. She'd committed corporate espionage. She'd accessed my accounts without authorization, falsified evidence, and tried to destroy my career because I had the audacity to exist in the same building as her. They called her in that afternoon. I wasn't in the room, but I heard about it later from a coworker. She tried to deny it at first, said the footage must be wrong, that the timestamps were off. But there was too much evidence. She'd been caught. They fired her on the spot, escorted her out of the building the same day. I watched from my desk as security walked her to the door. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word, just left. HR apologized to me. They cleared my record, removed the probation, and my manager personally came by to say he was sorry for not digging deeper. A month later, I got promoted. They said it was for my professionalism and dedication, but I think it was also guilt. They'd almost fired me based on lies, and they knew it. I found out later that Jessica was struggling to find new work. That termination was on her record, and when potential employers called for references, they were told she'd been fired for falsifying evidence and harassment. She torched her own career trying to torch mine. I don't feel bad for her, not even a little bit. She didn't just cheat with my boyfriend. She tried to destroy my livelihood because she couldn't handle the awkwardness of working near me. She weaponized HR. She fabricated evidence. She made me feel like I was going insane, and the only reason she got caught was because she got cocky. She thought she'd covered her tracks. She didn't. The whole thing taught me something, though. People will do absolutely unhinged things when they feel threatened, and sometimes the best thing you can do is stay calm, gather evidence, and let them hang themselves. Jessica built her own trap. I just made sure the right people saw it. I'm still at the company. Jessica's not. And honestly, that's justice enough for me. But workplace sabotage doesn't always come from romantic rivals. Sometimes it's the boss who mistakes professionalism for an invitation. I used to think workplace harassment claims were straightforward. Someone does something wrong, you report it, the system handles it. That's how it's supposed to work, right? Turns out the system can be weaponized just as easily as it can protect you. I learned that the hard way when my boss decided to destroy my career because I wouldn't sleep with him. Mark was my manager at a mid-sized marketing firm. When I first started, he seemed normal enough. Professional, decent at his job, nothing remarkable. But about 3 months in, things started to shift. He'd make comments about my appearance during meetings. Nothing overtly gross at first, just things like, "You look nice today," or "That color really suits you." I'd smile politely and redirect the conversation back to work. I didn't want to make it awkward. I needed this job. Then the comments got more specific. He started complimenting my body, asking if I worked out, telling me I should wear certain outfits more often. He'd find excuses to stop by my desk, lean a little too close when reviewing my work, touch my shoulder when he walked past. I started documenting everything in a private notes app on my phone, just timestamps and descriptions. I wasn't planning to report him. I just wanted a record in case things escalated. I kept deflecting. I'd step away when he got too close, change the subject when he got personal, keep every conversation focused on work. It was exhausting, but I thought I was handling it. Then I started dating someone, a guy I'd met through friends, completely outside of work. I didn't broadcast it, but I mentioned it casually when Mark asked if I had weekend plans. His entire demeanor changed overnight. The friendly act dropped. He became cold, critical, nitpicking everything I did. Suddenly, projects I'd been praised for were being torn apart. He started writing me up for being 2 minutes late, for typos in internal emails, for things he'd never cared about before. I knew what was happening, but I didn't know how to prove it. It felt like retaliation, but I couldn't connect the dots in a way that HR would take seriously. Then came the breaking point. I was called into an HR meeting with no warning. Mark was already sitting there with the HR director and another manager I barely knew. They told me there had been a complaint filed against me, a serious one. Mark had accused me of sexual harassment. He claimed I'd been sending him inappropriate messages, making advances, and creating a hostile work environment. I sat there completely frozen. I couldn't even process what they were saying. Me? Harassing him? It was so absurd I almost laughed. But they weren't joking. They had a formal complaint, documented incidents, screenshots of messages that I'd allegedly sent. Except I hadn't sent any of them. I'd never texted Mark outside of work-related communication. I'd never made an advance. I'd spent months trying to avoid being alone with him. They suspended me on the spot, no pay, pending investigation. They said it was standard procedure, that they had to take all claims seriously. I asked to see the evidence. They said they couldn't share it during an active investigation. I was told to leave the building immediately and that they'd be in touch. I drove home in a daze. I couldn't believe this was happening. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, trying to figure out how he'd fabricated evidence, how he'd managed to twist things so completely. Then it hit me. I had evidence too. Every text, every email, every Slack message we'd ever exchanged. I'd kept everything. I spent that entire night going through my phone, my laptop, my email archives. I pulled every single message Mark had ever sent me, the flirtatious comments, the request to meet after hours, the messages where he asked if I was seeing anyone, if I'd ever dated a coworker, if I wanted to grab drinks sometime. I had all of it, and I had the dates, a clear timeline showing his behavior, my polite deflections, and the exact moment everything changed when I mentioned my boyfriend. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found a Slack thread he'd forgotten to delete, a group chat with 2 other managers where he talked about me. He called me a tease, said I'd been leading him on, and then embarrassed him by dating someone else. And then, in a message dated 3 days before the HR complaint, he wrote, "She needs to be taught a lesson. I'll handle it." I screenshot everything. I organized it chronologically. I built a dossier that was impossible to ignore. Then I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, one who specialized in workplace retaliation and wrongful termination. I walked her through everything, sent her the evidence, and she told me we had a case that would make the company panic. She sent a formal letter to the company's legal department. It included samples of the evidence, a timeline of Mark's harassment and retaliation, and a very clear threat of a lawsuit if they didn't resolve this immediately. She also made it clear that if they tried to bury it, we'd go public. The marketing industry is small. Reputation matters. They knew that. The company's response was fast. Within 48 hours, I got a call asking me to come in for a meeting with their head of legal and the VP of HR. Mark wasn't there. They apologized. They said they'd completed their investigation and found his claims to be baseless. They said he'd been terminated effective immediately. They offered me my job back with back pay for the suspension, a formal apology in my personnel file, and a promotion to a different department under a new manager. I said no. I didn't want to work for a company that had suspended me without even looking at the evidence. A company that had taken his word over mine without question. My lawyer negotiated a settlement instead, 6 figures, an NDA that protected me more than it protected them, and a glowing reference letter that made no mention of the suspension or investigation. And here's where it gets absurd. While the settlement was being finalized, I got a message on LinkedIn from a competitor. They'd heard through the industry grapevine that I was looking for new opportunities. They didn't know the details, just that I was available. They offered me a fully remote position doing the same work I'd been doing, but for double the salary. I took it. I signed the offer letter the same day I signed the settlement agreement. I walked away from that company with money in my pocket and a better job lined up. Mark, meanwhile, is unemployable in the industry. Word spreads fast when someone gets fired for filing a false harassment claim. No one wants that liability on their team. I still have all the evidence saved in 3 separate places. I probably don't need it anymore, but it makes me feel safer knowing it exists. It's a reminder that I didn't imagine what happened, that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or any of the things I worried people would think. The whole experience changed how I approach work. I document everything now, every conversation, every email, every performance review. I keep a paper trail because I know how quickly things can be twisted. I know how easily someone in power can rewrite the narrative and make you the villain. I'm in a better place now. The new job is great. My boss is professional and respectful. I work from home, set my own hours, and make more money than I ever did before. But I won't lie and say it didn't leave a mark. I'm more guarded now, more skeptical. I don't trust HR departments or company policies the way I used to. I know they exist to protect the company, not the employees. If there's anything I learned from this, it's that you have to protect yourself. Keep records, trust your gut, and if someone tries to weaponize the system against you, fight back with everything you've got, because sometimes the people who scream the loudest about being victims are the ones doing the most damage. Now let's flip the script. What happens when you're the one accused of being controlling, and the internet believes them? Alex and I had been together for almost 3 years when things started to change. He became distant, stopped texting me back for hours, would cancel plans at the last minute. When I asked him what was going on, he'd brush me off and say he was stressed about work. I believed him at first. I tried to be supportive, give him space, do all the things you're supposed to do when your partner is going through something. But the distance kept growing, and eventually I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, I sat him down and asked him directly if something was wrong between us. He looked at me like I'd just asked the most exhausting question in the world and said I was suffocating him, that I was too needy, too demanding, that I didn't give him room to breathe. I was stunned. I asked him what he meant. What I'd done that made him feel that way. He couldn't give me specifics. He just kept saying I was too much, that I needed to back off. So I did. I gave him the space he said he needed, even though it felt like he was pulling away from me completely. 2 weeks later, he posted a Twitter thread about me. He didn't use my name, but he didn't have to. Everyone who followed him knew who he was talking about. The thread started with something like, I need to talk about what it's like to be in a controlling relationship because I'm finally free and I want other people to know they're not alone. Then he laid it all out. He said I tracked his phone without his permission, that I isolated him from his friends, that I would guilt trip him whenever he wanted to do anything without me, that I constantly accused him of cheating and made him feel like a prisoner in his own relationship. The thread went viral. Thousands of retweets, tens of thousands of likes. People were calling me a monster. They were saying he was brave for speaking out. My Instagram started getting flooded with messages from strangers calling me abusive, telling me I deserved to be alone, that I was toxic and manipulative. Some of them were graphic, telling me I should hurt myself, that the world would be better off without people like me in it. I had to turn off my notifications because it was so overwhelming. Then it got worse. I was a freelance graphic designer, and a lot of my clients followed Alex on social media. 3 of them emailed me within 2 days to say they were terminating our contracts. They didn't say it was because of the thread, but the timing was obvious. One of them said they wanted to work with people whose values aligned with theirs, and they'd heard some concerning things. I was losing work, losing my reputation, and I couldn't even defend myself because every time I tried to respond to someone, they'd just quote Alex's thread back at me like it was scripture. I felt completely powerless. Alex had painted this picture of me as this controlling, abusive partner, and everyone just believed him without question. No one asked for my side. No one wanted to hear it. I was the villain in a story I didn't even recognize. But here's the thing. Alex had made one critical mistake. Every single thing he accused me of was documented, and the documentation told a completely different story. The phone tracking, he was the one who asked me to share my location with him. We'd both done it after I had a car accident and he panicked because he couldn't reach me. I went back through our messages and found the exact conversation where he suggested it. He said it would make him feel better knowing I was safe, especially when I was driving late at night. I'd agreed because it seemed reasonable and I had nothing to hide. I had screenshots of that entire conversation. The isolation from friends. I pulled up months of text messages where his friends would invite him out and he'd decline on his own. I never told him not to go. In fact, there were multiple times where I encouraged him to hang out with them. I found messages where I'd literally said things like, "You should go, you haven't seen them in a while." And he'd respond saying he was too tired or not in the mood. Not once did I tell him he couldn't see his friends. Not once. The accusations of cheating, I never accused him of anything. I asked him once early on if everything was okay between us because he'd been acting different. That was it. One conversation framed as concern, not accusation. I had that message thread too. And here's the kicker. While I was going through our old messages looking for proof to defend myself, I found something else. Evidence that he'd been cheating on me. Messages with someone named Rachel from his gym. Flirty at first, then explicit, then planning meetups. The affair had been going on for at least 4 months, maybe longer. The timeline matched perfectly with when he started saying I was suffocating him, when he started needing space. Suddenly, everything made sense. The distance, the defensiveness, the sudden need for independence. He wasn't pulling away because I was controlling. He was pulling away because he was cheating and needed me out of the way. And when I started asking questions, he panicked and flipped the script. He made me the bad guy so he could be the victim. So no one would question why he was leaving. It was calculated, it was deliberate, and it almost worked. That's when everything unraveled. For him, not me. I spent an entire weekend building a Google Doc. I titled it The Actual Timeline, and I filled it with every single screenshot, every piece of evidence that contradicted his story. I included the messages about the location sharing, the texts where I encouraged him to see his friends, the conversation where I gently asked if we were okay. Then I added the messages with Rachel, all of them. The flirting, the planning, the "I can't wait to see you again" texts. I time-stamped everything. I made it clear, methodical, and impossible to deny. At the top of the document, I wrote a short introduction. I said I hadn't wanted to do this publicly, that I'd tried to handle it privately, but since Alex had decided to destroy my reputation online, I had no choice but to defend myself with facts. I said I wasn't asking people to take my word for it. I was giving them the receipts and they could decide for themselves. Then I posted the link on Twitter. The response was immediate. People started reading it, sharing it, quote tweeting it. Within hours, it had more traction than his original thread. The narrative started to shift. People who'd called me abusive were now apologizing. People who'd defended Alex were quietly deleting their tweets. His mentions were flooded with people calling him out, asking him to explain the screenshots, demanding accountability. Alex tried to double down at first. He posted a follow-up saying I'd manipulated the screenshots, that I was lying, that this was exactly the kind of behavior he'd been talking about. But it didn't work. Too many people had seen the evidence. Too many things lined up. His story didn't make sense anymore, and people could see it. Then his friends started turning on him. A few of them reached out to me privately to apologize. They said they should have asked more questions, that they felt awful for believing him without hearing my side. One of them even commented publicly on my thread, confirming that Alex had declined Hangouts on his own and that I'd never been the issue. Things went from bad to unhinged. Alex deleted the original thread, then he deleted his follow-up. Then he deactivated his entire Twitter account. His Instagram went private. He completely disappeared from social media within 48 hours. I didn't gloat. I didn't post some triumphant victory lap. I just left the document up and let it speak for itself. The clients who dropped me reached back out. 2 of them apologized and asked if I'd be willing to work with them again. I said no to one and yes to the other, depending on how genuine their apology felt. Other people started reaching out with freelance opportunities, saying they'd seen what happened and respected how I handled it. My work didn't just recover, it actually grew. Alex tried to contact me a few weeks later. He sent me a long email saying he was sorry, that he'd panicked, that he didn't know what he was doing. He said he'd made a huge mistake and he wanted to explain. I didn't respond. There was nothing he could say that would change what he'd done or how he'd tried to destroy me. I blocked him and moved on. I'm writing a book now. It's about digital gaslighting, about what happens when someone uses social media to rewrite reality and destroy your reputation. I've been contacted by other people who went through something similar, who had their lives turned upside down by someone's viral lie. We're building something together, a resource for people who need to defend themselves against this kind of manipulation. It's not published yet, but it's happening, and I'm proud of it. Looking back, I don't regret posting that document. Some people said I should have taken the high road, that I should have just let it go. But the high road doesn't protect you when someone's actively ruining your life. The truth does, and I had the receipts to prove it. Public humiliation is one thing, but imagine facing it in front of your entire family during the holidays. I hadn't spoken to my mother in 3 weeks when I got the text. It was from my younger brother, and all it said was, "Mom invited Rachel to Thanksgiving. Thought you should know." I stared at my phone for a full minute, trying to process what I'd just read. Rachel, my ex-girlfriend, the person who'd spent the last 2 months telling my entire family that I was an abusive, controlling monster. She was going to be at Thanksgiving dinner, and apparently I wasn't. Let me back up. Rachel and I dated for 2 years. When things ended, it wasn't pretty, but I thought it was over. Done. We'd go our separate ways, and that would be it. I was wrong. A few weeks after the breakup, my mum called me. She sounded disappointed, which was strange because we'd always been close. She asked me if the things Rachel had been saying were true. I had no idea what she was talking about. She said Rachel had reached out to her, crying, saying I'd been emotionally abusive during our relationship, that I'd controlled her finances, isolated her from friends, manipulated her into staying when she wanted to leave. None of it was true, not a single word. I tried to explain that to my mum, but she cut me off. She said Rachel seemed really hurt, and that maybe I didn't realize how my behavior had affected her. Maybe I should reflect on my actions. I was stunned. My own mother was taking my ex-girlfriend's side without even asking for my perspective. I told her Rachel was lying, that I'd never done any of those things, but she just sighed and said we'd talk later. Then my siblings started reaching out. My sister sent me a long text about how disappointed she was in me. My brother said he needed time to process everything. They'd all talked to Rachel. She'd told them the same story, with details that made it sound credible. She said I'd controlled the bank account, that she wasn't allowed to spend money without asking me, that I'd made her feel worthless. She painted this picture of me as some kind of manipulative abuser, and my family believed her. I tried to defend myself. I sent texts, made phone calls, tried to explain what actually happened in our relationship, but no one wanted to hear it. They said I was being defensive, that I needed to take accountability. Rachel had gotten to them first, and her version of events was the one they believed. I felt like I was going insane. These were people who'd known me my whole life, and they were treating me like a stranger. When my brother told me Rachel had been invited to Thanksgiving, I realized how deep this went. She wasn't just bad-mouthing me to my family. She'd replaced me. She was going to sit at my mother's table, in my seat, and play the victim while I was exiled. My mum had actually told my brother to tell me it would be better if I didn't come this year, that everyone needed space from me, because of lies. I spent that week putting together a folder. I wasn't going to let this stand. If my family wanted the truth, I'd give them the truth in a way they couldn't ignore. I pulled every bank statement from our joint account for the last year of our relationship. I screenshotted every text message that contradicted her story. I built a timeline of events with evidence for each claim she'd made, and I found some things even I'd forgotten about, like the $12,000 that disappeared from our joint account 2 weeks before we broke up, money I'd been saving for a down payment on a house. Rachel had transferred it to her personal account and then closed the joint account without telling me. When I confronted her about it at the time, she said it was her money too, and that she needed it. I'd been too exhausted from the breakup to fight her on it, but I had the bank records, transfers, dates, amounts, all of it. Or the pregnancy scare she'd used to keep me from leaving 6 months before we actually broke up. She'd told me she was pregnant, that we needed to work things out for the baby. I'd stayed. I'd tried harder. Then 2 weeks later, she said she'd miscarried. I was devastated. I found out later, through a mutual friend, that she'd never been pregnant. She'd faked the whole thing to manipulate me into staying. I had the texts where she admitted it to her friend, bragging about how it had worked. And then there was the cheating. My former roommate, Derek, I'd found messages between them on her laptop when I was borrowing it to print something. Explicit messages, photos, proof that she'd been sleeping with him for the last 3 months of our relationship. That was actually why we broke up. I caught her. But she'd somehow spun that into me being controlling and going through her private things without permission. I put it all in the folder, every piece of evidence organized, labeled, ready to present. And then I showed up to Thanksgiving dinner anyway. My mom answered the door. She looked shocked to see me. She started to say something about how she'd asked me not to come, but I walked past her into the dining room. Everyone was already seated. My siblings, my aunt and uncle, my grandmother, and Rachel, sitting in the chair I usually sat in, right next to my mother. She looked up when I walked in, and her face went pale. I didn't say hello. I didn't apologize for crashing. I just walked to the head of the table, set down the folder, and said we needed to talk. My mom tried to intervene, said this wasn't the time or place, but I told her it absolutely was. Rachel had made her accusations in front of my family. I was going to present my defense in front of my family. I opened the folder and started laying out documents on the table. Bank statements showing the $12,000 Rachel had stolen. Screenshots of her texts admitting she'd faked a pregnancy. Messages between her and Derek proving the affair. I went through each piece of evidence methodically, calmly, explaining what it showed and how it contradicted the story she'd told them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just presented facts. The room was completely silent. My mom was staring at the bank statements, her hand over her mouth. My sister was reading the text screenshots, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. My brother was looking at Rachel, waiting for her to say something. She didn't. She just sat there, frozen. Then came the breaking point. Rachel tried to leave. She pushed her chair back and started to stand, mumbling something about not having to listen to this. My brother stood up and blocked the doorway. He didn't touch her, didn't threaten her, just stood there and said, "No, you're going to explain this. All of it." She started crying, said I was twisting things, taking things out of context, that the evidence didn't show the whole story. My mom asked her directly about the money. Rachel stammered, tried to say it was complicated, that she'd needed it for an emergency. I pulled out more bank statements showing she'd spent it on a vacation with Derek. She had no answer for that. My sister asked about the pregnancy. Rachel said she'd been confused, that she'd really thought she was pregnant. I showed her the text where Rachel admitted to her friend that she'd made it up. Rachel's face crumpled. She said she'd exaggerated some things, that she'd been hurt and angry and maybe she hadn't been completely honest. Exaggerated. That was the word she used. My grandmother, who'd been silent up until that point, told Rachel to leave, just like that. No yelling, no drama. She just said, "I think you should go now." Rachel looked around the table, waiting for someone to defend her. No one did. She grabbed her purse and left. I heard the front door slam a minute later. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mum was crying. She kept saying she was sorry, that she should have asked me, that she should have listened. My siblings apologized too. They said Rachel had seemed so convincing, so genuine, that they'd believed her without questioning it. My aunt said something about how you never really know someone. It all felt hollow. I told them I appreciated the apologies, but that this had shown me something I couldn't ignore. They'd chosen to believe a lie about me without giving me a chance to defend myself. They'd invited my abuser, the person who actually manipulated and stole from me, to family dinner while excluding me. That wasn't something I could just forgive and move on from. I stayed for dinner because my grandmother asked me to. We ate in uncomfortable silence, and I left right after. I haven't been back since. My mum calls sometimes, my siblings text. They want things to go back to normal, but I don't know if they can. Trust, once broken like that, doesn't just heal. They showed me that their loyalty was conditional, that they were willing to believe the worst about me based on someone else's word. That's not something I can forget. I'm low contact now. I'll respond to texts, show up for major events if I feel like it. But the closeness we had is gone. Maybe that makes me petty. Maybe I should be grateful they eventually believed me. But I can't shake the feeling that they only apologized because I had proof. If I hadn't shown up with that folder, they'd still think I was the villain. And that's not a foundation you can build a relationship on. Families can wound you, but sometimes the deepest cuts come from the person you thought would never betray you. I had a best friend for 10 years. Her name was Mia, and I trusted her with everything. Every secret, every fear, every moment of my life that mattered. When I started dating my girlfriend, Lauren, Mia was the first person I told. She was so happy for me. She said Lauren seemed perfect for me, that she could see how good we were together. She was always around, always supportive, always offering advice when things got rough. I thought I was lucky to have someone like that in my life. Lauren and I were good together, really good. We had our issues like any couple, but nothing we couldn't work through. We communicated, we laughed, we built something that felt solid, and Mia was always there, checking in on both of us, making sure we were happy. She'd text me asking how things were going, if Lauren and I had any plans, if everything was okay between us. I thought she cared. I thought she was just being a good friend. Then things started to change. Lauren became paranoid. She'd accuse me of things that made no sense. She'd ask where I was when I wasn't with her, question who I was texting, get upset over conversations I didn't remember having. At first, I thought she was just stressed. Work had been hard on her, and I figured she needed reassurance. So I gave it to her. I told her I loved her, that I wasn't going anywhere, that she could trust me. But it didn't help. The accusations got worse. She started saying I was lying to her, that I was hiding things, that she had proof I wasn't where I said I was. I had no idea what she was talking about. I wasn't lying. I wasn't hiding anything. I asked her to show me this proof, and she'd just get more upset, saying I was gaslighting her, that I knew exactly what I'd done. The fights became constant. Every conversation turned into an interrogation. I felt like I was losing my mind. Then she broke up with me. She said she couldn't be with someone she didn't trust. She said she had evidence that I'd been cheating, that I'd been lying about where I was and who I was with. She wouldn't show me the evidence. She just said she was done, and that was it. I was devastated. I kept asking her what I'd done, begging her to tell me what proof she had, but she wouldn't. She blocked me on everything and refused to talk to me. I spent days trying to figure out what had happened. I went through my phone, my messages, my emails, looking for anything that could explain why she thought I'd cheated. There was nothing. I hadn't done anything wrong. I called Mia crying, asking her if she knew what was going on. She said she didn't, that Lauren had just been acting weird lately, and that maybe she'd explain eventually. Mia told me to give her space, that maybe Lauren would come around. I believed her. But that wasn't even the worst part. A week later, one of our mutual friends reached out to me. She said she needed to tell me something, but she didn't know how. She sent me screenshots, messages between Mia and Lauren, messages that went back months. Mia had been feeding Lauren lies about me, fabricated screenshots of conversations I'd never had, fake messages that made it look like I was cheating, concerned friend texts saying she'd seen me with someone else, that she was worried about Lauren, that she thought I was being unfair to her. I couldn't breathe. I read through every single message, and it was all there. Mia had orchestrated the entire thing. She'd photoshopped text conversations to make it look like I was flirting with other people. She'd sent Lauren messages pretending to be a concerned friend, saying she'd seen me at places I'd never been, with people I didn't know. She'd slowly, methodically poisoned my relationship over the course of months. And then I found out why. In one of the messages, Mia told Lauren that she deserved better, that she deserved someone who would treat her right, someone like Mia. She'd been in love with Lauren the entire time. She wanted my girlfriend for herself, so she decided to destroy our relationship from the inside. I confronted Mia. I showed up at her apartment with the screenshots and demanded an explanation. She didn't even try to deny it. She just looked at me and said, "I deserve happiness too." Like that justified everything. Like breaking up my relationship and lying to both of us was acceptable because she had feelings. I told her she was a psychopath. She said I was overreacting, that Lauren and I weren't right for each other anyway, and that she was just helping Lauren see the truth. The audacity was unreal. She genuinely believed she'd done nothing wrong, that manipulating and lying to the two people she claimed to care about was justified because she wanted something. I left without another word. I couldn't even look at her. I took everything to our mutual friend group, every screenshot, every fabricated message, every lie Mia had told. I didn't editorialize. I just laid it all out and let them see for themselves what she'd done. The response was immediate. People were horrified. Mia tried to defend herself, saying I was twisting things, that it wasn't as bad as it looked. But the evidence spoke for itself. Within days, she was cut off from everyone. No one wanted anything to do with her. She'd burned every bridge she had. Lauren reached out to me a few days later. She apologized. She said she'd been manipulated, that she didn't know Mia had been lying, and that she was so sorry for not believing me. She wanted to try again. She wanted to fix things, but I couldn't. I told her I appreciated the apology, but I couldn't be with someone who believed lies about me so easily. She'd trusted Mia's word over mine without ever giving me a chance to defend myself. She'd broken up with me based on fabricated evidence and refused to even show me what she thought I'd done. That wasn't something I could just move past. She didn't take it well. She said she understood, but that she wished I'd reconsider. I told her I needed time and space and that I didn't think we'd end up back together. She said she'd wait if I changed my mind. I haven't. Things went from bad to unhinged when I found out Mia had been doing this to other people too. Another friend came forward and said Mia had spread rumors about her a year ago, trying to isolate her from the group. Someone else said Mia had lied to their partner about them cheating, but they'd managed to clear it up before things got too bad. It turned out Mia had a pattern. She'd manipulate people, sabotage relationships, and play the victim when things blew up. I just happened to be the one who finally exposed her. I'm in therapy now, processing everything. The betrayal from Mia hurts worse than the breakup with Lauren, honestly. I loved Lauren, but I'd known Mia for a decade. I trusted her with parts of myself I didn't share with anyone else, and she used all of it against me. She weaponized my trust, my relationship, and my vulnerability because she wanted something I had. That kind of betrayal doesn't just go away. It changes how you see people, how you trust people. I still don't talk to either of them. Mia tried to reach out a few months ago, saying she was sorry and that she'd been going through a hard time. I didn't respond. I don't owe her forgiveness and I don't owe her closure. She made her choices. She can live with them. As for Lauren, I hope she's doing okay. I don't wish her any harm, but I can't be with someone who didn't trust me enough to ask questions before believing the worst. Maybe that makes me unforgiving. Maybe it makes me harsh. But I spent months being accused of things I didn't do, and she never once gave me the benefit of the doubt. That's not a foundation I can build on. I'm doing better now, slowly. I've made new friends, people who don't have a decade of history to weaponize. I'm more careful about who I let in, more guarded. And maybe that's sad, but it's also necessary. Some people will smile to your face while dismantling your life behind your back. Mia taught me that. And as much as it hurt to learn, at least I know now. Betrayal from a best friend is brutal. But what about betrayal from someone ethically bound to protect you? I started seeing a therapist named Linda because I was struggling with childhood trauma that I'd never really dealt with. She came highly recommended, had years of experience, and specialized in trauma recovery. Our first few sessions felt safe. She listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and created a space where I felt like I could finally open up about things I'd kept buried for years. I told her things I'd never told anyone. Things about my family, about abuse I'd experienced as a kid, about the ways it still affected me as an adult. It felt like progress, like I was finally healing. A few months into therapy, a friend sent me a link to a podcast. She said she'd been listening to this self-help show and thought I might like it. The host was a therapist who talked about common issues people face and gave advice on how to work through them. I didn't think much of it at first, but I clicked the link and started listening while I was cooking dinner. The voice sounded familiar, really familiar, and then I realized why. It was Linda, my therapist. I thought it was kind of cool at first. I listened to a few episodes and they were fine. General advice, nothing too specific. But then I noticed something. In one episode, she told a story about a client who'd struggled with a very particular kind of childhood neglect. The details were vague enough that it could have been anyone, but something about it felt familiar. The way she described the situation, the emotions involved, it all echoed things I'd talked about in our sessions. I told myself I was being paranoid. She was a therapist. She probably heard similar stories all the time. It was just a coincidence. Then she did it again. Another episode, another story that felt a little too close to things I'd shared with her. This time, the details were more specific. She talked about a client whose parent had used a very particular phrase during arguments, a phrase that had stuck with them into adulthood. It was the exact phrase I'd told Linda about. The exact one. I'd shared it in session because it still triggered me, and hearing it come out of her mouth on a public podcast made my stomach drop. I went back and listened to more episodes. I started taking notes, writing down the stories she told, and comparing them to things I'd shared in therapy. The pattern was undeniable. She was using my sessions as content for her podcast. She'd change minor details, keep things vague enough to maintain plausible deniability, but the core of the stories was mine, my trauma, my life, my private pain, repackaged as entertainment and advice for her listeners. I felt violated in a way I can't fully describe. Therapy is supposed to be a safe space. You're supposed to be able to say anything without fear of it being shared or used against you. And she'd taken the most vulnerable parts of me and broadcast them to thousands of people. I didn't know what to do at first. I felt paralyzed. Part of me wondered if I was overreacting, if I was reading too much into it. But the more I listened, the more certain I became. This wasn't coincidence. This was exploitation. I confronted her at our next session. I told her I'd been listening to her podcast and that I recognized stories from our sessions. She looked at me calmly and said I was mistaken. She said the situations I was thinking of were common issues that many people face, and that it was natural for me to see myself in those stories because they resonated with my own experiences. She called it projection. She said it was actually a good sign that I was connecting with the material, that it meant I was processing my trauma. She made me feel like I was being paranoid, but I wasn't. I knew what I'd heard, so I did something I probably shouldn't have done, but I needed proof. I recorded our next session. I used my phone, kept it in my bag, and just let it run. We talked about a recent panic attack I'd had, triggered by something specific that had happened at work. I told her about the situation in detail, about how it had made me feel, about the memories it brought up. She listened, took notes, and we worked through it together. It felt like a normal session. 2 weeks later, a new podcast episode dropped. I listened to it with my notes app open, ready to document everything. And there it was. She told the story of a client who'd had a panic attack at work, triggered by a very specific situation. She changed the setting slightly, altered a few minor details, but the core of the story was exactly what I told her, and some of the phrases she used were verbatim. Word for word what I'd said in that recorded session. I had her. I had proof that she was taking confidential information from therapy sessions and using it for her podcast without my consent. I didn't confront her again. I went straight to the state licensing board. I filed a formal complaint with a transcript of the recorded session, timestamps from the podcast episode, and a detailed comparison showing how she'd used my private information. I included examples from other episodes too, showing a pattern of behavior, and here's where it gets absurd. While I was waiting for the board to investigate, I decided to go public. I made a TikTok account and posted a video. I didn't show my face, didn't use my real name, but I played clips from the podcast side by side with audio from my recorded session. I bleeped out identifying details, but the similarities were impossible to ignore. I explained what had happened, how my therapist had violated my privacy, and how she was using her client's trauma as content. The video went viral. Within days, it had hundreds of thousands of views. People were furious. Other therapists commented saying this was a massive ethical violation. Former clients of Linda's started reaching out, saying they'd had similar suspicions but hadn't known how to prove it. The comments were full of people sharing their own stories of therapist misconduct, and it became this huge conversation about patient privacy and the ethics of therapists who also create public content. Linda tried to do damage control. She posted a statement on her podcast saying the stories she shared were composites, that they weren't based on any one person, and that she always changed details to protect privacy. But it was too late. People had seen the video. They'd heard the comparisons. Her credibility was destroyed. The state board moved quickly. They launched a full investigation, interviewed other clients, and reviewed recordings of her podcast. Within 2 months, they'd found multiple violations of patient confidentiality. Linda's license was suspended and then revoked entirely. Her practice shut down, her podcast was removed from all platforms, and several of her former clients, including me, filed a lawsuit against her for breach of confidentiality and emotional distress. The lawsuit is still ongoing, but my lawyer says we have a strong case. Linda tried to settle early on, but I refused. I want this on record. I want people to know what she did. She didn't just violate my privacy. She weaponized my trauma for profit and validation. She built her brand on the suffering of the people who trusted her most. I'm seeing a new therapist now, someone who specializes in trauma-informed care and who I've vetted extensively. It took me months to trust her enough to open up, and I'm still cautious about what I share. What Linda did changed how I approach therapy. I'm more guarded now, more aware of the power dynamic, more careful about who I trust with my story. I've also started advocating for stronger patient privacy laws. I've connected with organizations that work on mental health policy, and I've shared my story with legislators who are drafting bills to close loopholes in therapist accountability. It's become something bigger than just my own experience. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to other people. Looking back, I don't regret going public. Some people said I should have just filed the complaint and let the system handle it quietly. But the system doesn't always work, and silence protects people like Linda. She was able to do what she did for years because no one spoke up. I spoke up, and it cost her everything. That feels like justice to me. Privacy violations cut deep, but what if someone uses the language of therapy to manipulate you instead? I used to think therapy language was a good thing. It meant people were working on themselves, learning healthier ways to communicate, building emotional intelligence. My partner, Jordan, started using therapy terms about 6 months into our relationship, and at first I thought it was progress. We were both trying to be better, more self-aware, more respectful of each other's needs. That's what I told myself anyway. It started small. Whenever I'd bring up something that bothered me, Jordan would respond with phrases like, "I hear you, but I need to set a boundary here." Or, "That sounds like you're asking me to do emotional labor I'm not equipped for right now." At first, I'd back off. I didn't want to overstep. I didn't want to be the kind of partner who demanded too much or ignored boundaries. So I'd apologize, give Jordan space, and try to handle my feelings on my own. But the phrases kept coming. If I was upset about something and tried to talk about it, Jordan would say I was trauma dumping. If I asked where Jordan had been or who Jordan was texting, I was told I wasn't respecting their need for independence. If I expressed hurt over something Jordan had done, I was being emotionally manipulative. Every single conversation became a minefield of therapy jargon that shut me down before I could even explain how I felt. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was too needy. Maybe I was carrying unresolved trauma into the relationship. Maybe I didn't understand what healthy boundaries actually looked like. So I went to therapy. I told my therapist everything, explained how Jordan communicated, and asked if I was doing something wrong. My therapist listened carefully and then said something that caught me off guard. She said it sounded like Jordan was using therapeutic language to avoid accountability, not to create healthier communication. I didn't want to believe it. I loved Jordan. I thought we were building something good. But I started paying closer attention, and I started to notice patterns. Jordan would stay out late without telling me where they'd been. When I'd ask, Jordan would say I was being controlling and not respecting their autonomy. Jordan would be glued to their phone, texting constantly, and when I'd ask who it was, I'd get accused of being insecure and codependent. Every concern I raised was pathologized. Every boundary I tried to set was dismissed as me being anxious or unreasonable. Then it got worse. Jordan started telling me I was emotionally abusive. Not in a fight, not in a heated moment, just casually. We'd be sitting on the couch and Jordan would say something like, "You know, the way you react when I don't text you back right away is actually a form of control. I've been reading about it, and it's abusive." I was floored. I'd never demanded immediate responses. I just mentioned once that it made me feel anxious when Jordan disappeared for hours without a word. And now I was being called abusive. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every time I tried to address something in our relationship, it was flipped back on me as evidence of my dysfunction. I started questioning everything I said, everything I felt, wondering if I really was the problem. But something in the back of my mind kept whispering that this wasn't right. That healthy relationships don't make you feel like you're walking on eggshells every time you try to communicate. That's when I started documenting everything. I didn't tell Jordan. I just started keeping a record of our conversations. I'd write down what I said, what Jordan said, the context, the outcome. I recorded a few of our arguments on my phone, just audio, so I could go back and make sure I wasn't misremembering things. And what I found was damning. Jordan wasn't using therapy language to communicate. Jordan was using it as a weapon to shut me up and avoid ever being held accountable for anything. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found out Jordan was having an affair. I wasn't snooping, I swear. Jordan left their laptop open on the kitchen table and a message notification popped up. It was explicit. It was from someone named Casey, and the message made it very clear they'd been seeing each other for months. I felt sick. I scrolled up through the conversation and it was all there. Meetups, plans, messages about how Jordan couldn't wait to leave me, how I was exhausting and needy, and how Casey was so much easier to be with. Everything clicked into place. The late nights, the secrecy, the constant accusations of me being controlling or anxious. Jordan had been cheating and using therapy language to make me feel crazy for noticing the red flags. Every time I questioned something, I was gaslighted into thinking I was the problem. And I'd believed it. I'd gone to therapy thinking I needed to fix myself, when the whole time Jordan was the one lying and manipulating. I didn't confront Jordan immediately. I needed to be smart about this. I called my therapist and asked if she'd be willing to do a session with both of us. I told her what I'd found and what I'd been documenting. She agreed, but she said she'd only do it if I was prepared for the relationship to end, because calling out that kind of behavior in a controlled setting usually doesn't lead to reconciliation. I told her I knew. I just needed Jordan to hear it from someone other than me. I needed validation that I wasn't losing my mind. Jordan agreed to the session, probably thinking it would be another opportunity to paint me as the problem. We sat down in my therapist's office, and I laid it all out. I brought the documentation, the recordings, the screenshots of the messages with Casey. I explained how Jordan had been using therapy language to shut down every conversation, to avoid accountability, to gaslight me into thinking I was abusive when I was just trying to communicate. My therapist didn't pull punches. She looked at Jordan and said very calmly, "What you're describing is not boundary setting. It's manipulation. You're using therapeutic language to control the narrative and avoid taking responsibility for your actions. That's not healthy communication. That's emotional abuse." Jordan's face went pale. They tried to argue, tried to say I was twisting things, that I was the one being manipulative by recording conversations. My therapist shut it down. She said recording conversations when you're being gaslit is a survival mechanism, not abuse. She pointed out every instance where Jordan had weaponized therapy speak, explained how it functioned as a silencing tactic, and made it clear that the affair was the ultimate proof that Jordan's accusations of me being controlling were projection. Jordan crumbled, started crying, saying they didn't mean for things to get this bad, that they'd made mistakes, but that didn't mean they were a bad person. My therapist said intent doesn't erase impact. I ended the relationship right there in that office. I told Jordan we were done, that I didn't want to hear excuses or apologies, and that I needed them out of my apartment by the end of the week. Jordan left without another word. And here's where it gets absurd. Jordan tried to smear me online, posted on social media about how I'd ambushed them in therapy, how I'd violated their privacy by recording conversations, how I was actually the abusive one and they were the victim. But our mutual friends had already seen the pattern. They'd watched Jordan use the same tactics on other people. A few of them reached out to me privately and said they'd been waiting for me to see it, that they'd tried to say something but didn't know how. The post didn't get the sympathy Jordan expected. People started commenting, asking for context, pointing out inconsistencies. Jordan deleted it within 24 hours and deactivated their account. I didn't engage, I didn't post my side, I just let the truth speak for itself. The people who mattered already knew what had happened. I'm still unpacking everything in therapy. It's hard to trust my own perceptions after being gaslit for so long. It's hard to not second-guess myself when I try to set boundaries or express feelings. But I'm getting there. I'm learning that therapy language is only helpful when it's used in good faith. When it's weaponized, it's just another form of control. Jordan tried to reach out a few weeks ago, sent me a long email about how they'd been reflecting and realized they'd hurt me, how they wanted to apologize and make amends. I didn't respond. There's nothing they could say that would change what they did or how they made me feel. Some bridges once burned aren't worth rebuilding. Weaponized therapy speak is insidious, but so is playing the victim online while deleting the evidence. I never thought I'd be the villain in someone else's story, especially not on the internet where millions of people could watch it unfold. But that's exactly what happened when my partner, Sam, decided to turn our private relationship struggles into viral content. We'd been together for 3 years. The last 6 months had been rough. We were drifting apart and I could feel it. I tried to talk to Sam about it multiple times. I suggested couples therapy, asked if we could set aside time to reconnect, tried everything I could think of to fix what was breaking between us. Sam would brush me off every time, say we didn't need therapy, that I was overthinking things, that everything was fine. Then they'd go out with friends, stay out until 3 in the morning and come home smelling like someone else's cologne. I wasn't stupid. I knew something was wrong. I knew they were probably seeing someone else. But I wanted to try to save what we had before just giving up. So I kept suggesting therapy, kept asking for communication, kept trying. Sam kept refusing. Then one day, I woke up to my phone blowing up. Text messages from friends, DMs from strangers, notifications I couldn't keep up with. I opened TikTok and saw that Sam had posted a video. It was them, sitting on our couch crying. The caption said something like, "When you realize you've been emotionally abandoned by the person you love most." In the video, Sam talked about how lonely they felt in our relationship, how I was cold and distant, how they tried so hard to make things work, but I just wouldn't meet them halfway, how they felt invisible in their own home. The video had millions of views. The comments were brutal. People were calling me a narcissist, saying I was emotionally abusive, telling Sam to leave me. My Instagram was flooded with messages from strangers telling me I was a terrible person. People I didn't know were making assumptions about my entire character based on a 2-minute video where I couldn't even defend myself. I felt sick. I watched the video 3 times, trying to understand how Sam could say those things when they knew the truth, when they knew I'd been the one begging for communication, begging for us to work on things together. They'd completely rewritten our story, left out every part that made them look bad, and painted me as the villain, and everyone believed it. I called Sam. They didn't answer. I texted asking what the video was about, why they'd posted something so personal without even talking to me first. They responded hours later saying they needed to express their feelings and that I should respect that. I asked them to take it down. They said no. They said it was their experience and they had a right to share it. Here's where it gets absurd. I started going through our old messages, every conversation where I'd asked to go to therapy, every text where I'd tried to plan a date night or ask if we could talk about what was wrong, every single message where Sam had blown me off, said they were too busy, or just didn't respond at all. I had months of evidence showing I'd been trying, and they'd been the one who was emotionally unavailable. Then I found something else. Messages between Sam and their ex, flirty messages that went back 4 months, plans to meet up, photos they'd sent each other, and in one message Sam literally wrote, "I'm thinking about posting something that will get sympathy points. People eat that stuff up." They'd planned the whole TikTok. It wasn't a genuine moment of vulnerability. It was calculated. It was performance. I sat with that information for 2 days. Part of me wanted to just let it go, break up quietly, and move on with my life. But another part of me knew that if I didn't defend myself, this narrative would follow me. People already thought I was a monster. If I stayed silent, that's what I'd be known as. So I made my own video. I didn't cry. I didn't perform. I just sat in front of the camera and calmly explained my side. I said I wasn't going to attack Sam, but that I needed to provide context that had been left out of their video. Then I showed the screenshots, messages where I'd asked to go to couples therapy and Sam had refused, texts where I'd planned dates and Sam had cancelled to go out with friends, call logs showing unanswered calls, voicemails I'd left asking if we could talk. And then I showed the messages with their ex, the flirting, the meetups, the message where Sam admitted to performing for the internet. I didn't editorialize. I just let the evidence speak for itself. I ended the video by saying I hoped everyone would think twice before jumping to conclusions about people they didn't know based on one-sided stories. I posted it and waited. The response was immediate. My video started getting shared, reposted, stitched. Within hours, it had more views than Sam's original. The comments shifted. People were apologizing to me, saying they'd been wrong, calling Sam manipulative. Sam's own followers started turning on them, asking why they'd lied, demanding accountability. Sam tried to do damage control. They posted another video saying I'd taken things out of context, that the messages didn't show the full picture. But it was too late. Too many people had seen the proof. Too many people realized they'd been manipulated into attacking someone who didn't deserve it. Sam's credibility was gone. Within a week, Sam had deleted both videos. Then they deleted their entire TikTok account. Their Instagram went private. They disappeared from the internet completely. I got a text from them saying I'd ruined their life, that I had no right to air our private business like that. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd aired our private business first. I'd just corrected the record. We broke up officially a few days later. Sam moved out, and I haven't spoken to them since. Some of our mutual friends took their side, said I should have handled it privately, but I don't see how I could have. Sam had made it public. They'd invited millions of people into our relationship and let them form opinions about me based on lies. I wasn't going to just sit there and let that stand. The whole experience changed how I see social media. People are so quick to believe what they see, to take one person's word as truth without questioning it. Sam knew that. They weaponized it. They turned their audience into a mob and pointed them at me, and it almost worked. If I hadn't had proof, if I hadn't been able to show people what really happened, I'd still be the villain in that story. I've become an advocate for digital accountability in relationships since then. I talk to people who've been through similar things, who've had partners blast them online and felt powerless to respond. There's this idea that you should always take the high road, that responding just makes you look defensive. But sometimes the high road means letting people believe lies about you. Sometimes you have to fight back. I don't regret posting that video. I don't regret defending myself. Sam made a choice to humiliate me publicly, and I made a choice not to let that be the final word. The internet can turn on you fast, but it can also turn just as fast when the truth comes out. And I made sure the truth came out. The internet can turn on you fast, but what about when someone sabotages you from the inside, at work? I started noticing something was off about 3 months into working at my new job. I'd be having perfectly normal conversations with my manager, contributing in team meetings, doing good work, and then suddenly I wasn't being invited to important planning sessions anymore. Projects I'd been working on were being reassigned without explanation. When I asked about it, my manager would give vague answers about workload distribution or say they thought someone else might be a better fit. It didn't make sense. My work was solid. I was meeting deadlines. I got along with everyone, or at least I thought I did. Then my performance review came. I sat down expecting it to be fine, maybe even good. Instead, my manager told me there were concerns about my attitude, that I was resistant to feedback, that some people found me difficult to work with. I was completely blindsided. I asked for specific examples, and she mentioned a few situations that I barely remembered, things that seemed totally innocuous at the time. She said multiple people had brought up concerns, but she wouldn't tell me who. She just said I needed to work on being more collaborative and open to input. I left that meeting feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I went over every interaction I'd had in the past few months, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. I couldn't find anything. I'd been polite, professional, helpful. I started second-guessing every email I sent, every comment I made in meetings. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for someone to tell me I'd messed up again. That's when I started paying closer attention to who was around when things went wrong, and I noticed a pattern. Emma, a co-worker in my department, was always nearby when these situations happened. She'd smile at me in the hallway, ask how my weekend was, compliment my work in front of others. But I started noticing that after our conversations, things would shift. I'd be pulled from a project. A meeting would get rescheduled without me. My manager would make an offhand comment about needing me to be more of a team player. I started keeping a work journal. I documented every interaction I had with Emma, every email exchange, every meeting we were both in. I wrote down what was said, who was there, what happened afterward. I kept copies of every email, every Slack message, every piece of communication. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I just knew something wasn't right, and I wanted to have a record of it. The pattern became clearer the more I documented. Emma would ask me about projects I was working on, ideas I had, problems I was trying to solve. I'd tell her, thinking we were just having normal work conversations. Then, a few days later, she'd present those exact ideas in a meeting as her own. She'd get praised for them, and I'd sit there knowing I'd told her that exact thing 3 days earlier. When I tried to speak up once, saying I'd actually had a similar idea, she'd smile and say something like, "Oh, great minds think alike," and everyone would laugh it off. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found out she was actively sabotaging me behind my back. I overheard her talking to another coworker in the break room, saying I'd been dismissive in a meeting that morning, except I'd been nothing but supportive in that meeting. I'd literally agreed with everything that was proposed. I started asking colleagues to loop me in on email chains, and I noticed Emma would respond to group emails with subtle digs. She'd say things like, "I think this approach might work better since some people have been resistant to the original plan," when I'd never been resistant to anything. Or she'd write, "Let's make sure everyone's on the same page this time," implying I'd been the one causing confusion when I hadn't. I realized she was creating a narrative about me that didn't exist. And because she was subtle about it, because she always smiled to my face and never said anything directly confrontational, no one questioned it. They just started believing I was the problem. My reputation was being destroyed one small comment at a time, and I had no way to defend myself without looking paranoid or defensive. Things escalated when I was called into my manager's office and told I was being placed on a performance improvement plan, essentially one step away from being fired. My manager said there had been ongoing concerns about my ability to collaborate and my attitude toward feedback. She said if things didn't improve in the next 60 days, they'd have to let me go. I asked again for specific examples, and she gave me the same vague answers. Someone said this, someone felt that. Multiple people had expressed concerns, but no names, no concrete incidents I could actually address. I went home that night and made a decision. I requested a formal meeting with HR. I didn't tell my manager, didn't give anyone a heads up. I just sent an email to the HR director asking for a confidential meeting to discuss workplace concerns. They scheduled it for the following week. I spent that entire week organizing my documentation. 6 months of notes, emails, Slack messages, meeting records. I built a timeline showing every instance where Emma had taken credit for my work, every subtle comment she'd made that damaged my reputation, every time I'd been excluded or reassigned after talking to her. And here's where it gets absurd. While I was preparing for the HR meeting, I found something I hadn't noticed before. Emma had accidentally copied me on an email chain where she was talking to another manager about a different coworker. She was doing the exact same thing to this woman that she'd done to me. Subtle digs, concerned trolling, making her sound difficult and uncooperative. I reached out to that coworker privately and asked if she'd noticed anything strange. She said she'd been having the same experience I had, excluded from projects, told she had attitude problems, put on a performance improvement plan. We compared notes and the pattern was identical. I brought everything to the HR meeting. The director and another HR rep sat with me for over 2 hours going through the documentation. I showed them the timeline, the emails, the pattern of behavior. I told them about the other coworker who'd experienced the same thing. I stayed calm, stuck to facts, didn't let emotion take over even though I wanted to scream. By the end of the meeting, their faces had changed. They said they'd investigate and get back to me. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, I kept my head down and continued documenting everything. Then I got called back to HR. They told me they'd interviewed multiple people, reviewed communication records, and found that Emma had engaged in a pattern of workplace sabotage targeting multiple women in the department. Not just me and the coworker I'd found, but 3 other women who'd left the company in the past 2 years. All of them had been told they were difficult to work with. All of them had been pushed out after Emma spread rumors and took credit for their work. Emma was fired the next day. My performance improvement plan was rescinded. My manager apologized, said she should have looked deeper into the concerns instead of just taking them at face value. 2 months later, I was promoted to a senior position. Emma's gone, her reputation in the industry is trashed, and I heard through the grapevine that one of her previous targets is actually suing her for defamation and career damage. I still keep a work journal. I probably always will. What Emma did taught me that you can't always trust that people will be fair, or that the truth will come out on its own. Sometimes you have to build your own case, document your own reality, and fight for yourself because no one else will. It shouldn't have to be that way, but it is, and I'd rather be prepared than blindsided ever again. Workplace toxicity can end careers, but credit theft? That's a special kind of betrayal. I spent 6 months building something I was genuinely proud of, a workflow system that streamlined our entire department's processes, cut down on redundant tasks, and saved the company thousands of dollars every month. I worked nights and weekends on it, tested it with my team, refined it based on feedback, and documented everything so it could be replicated in other departments. It was solid work, and I knew it. I was excited to present it to the leadership team. Except I never got the chance. My manager Greg scheduled a meeting with the executives before I could. I found out about it the day of, when someone from another department mentioned they'd heard Greg had an exciting new initiative to share. I assumed he was going to introduce the system and give me credit, maybe have me walk through the technical details. That's what a decent manager would do, right? I was wrong. I watched from my desk as Greg went into the conference room with the executives. The meeting ran long, over an hour, and when it ended, people were congratulating him in the hallway, telling him what a brilliant solution he'd come up with, asking him how he'd thought of it. He smiled and thanked them, soaking up praise for work he hadn't done. I sat there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. When he came back to his office, I followed him. I asked him about the meeting, tried to keep my tone neutral. He said it went great, that the executives loved the new system. I waited for him to mention my name, to acknowledge that I'd built it. He didn't. I finally asked directly if he'd told them I'd created it. He looked at me like I'd said something ridiculous and said, "You helped with the support work, sure, but the concept and strategy were mine. That's what leadership is about. Support work." He'd reduced 6 months of my work to support work. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into the executive office and tell them the truth right then. But I didn't. I went back to my desk, pulled up every piece of documentation I had about the project, and saved it all to a personal folder. Every email where I'd outlined ideas, every draft I'd created, every test result, every piece of feedback I'd incorporated. I had timestamps on everything, proof that this was my work, not his. Then I made a decision. I stopped working. Not completely, I still showed up and did my job, but I did exactly what was in my job description and nothing more. No extra projects, no innovation, no staying late to solve problems, no offering ideas in meetings. I became the most average, unremarkable employee in the department. And I waited. Within 2 weeks, the executives started asking Greg for updates. They wanted to expand the system to other departments. They wanted metrics on how it was performing. They wanted him to train other managers on implementation. Greg had no idea how to do any of that because he hadn't built it. He didn't understand the underlying structure, didn't know how the different components worked together, couldn't troubleshoot issues when they came up. He started asking me for help, framing it as delegation, asking me to support the rollout of his system. I said no, politely, professionally, but firmly. I told him I was focused on my core responsibilities and didn't have capacity for additional projects. He looked irritated, but couldn't exactly force me to do work outside my job description. He tried to figure it out himself. I watched him flounder in meetings, stumble through explanations, miss deadlines. Other managers started noticing. The system he'd taken credit for was falling apart because he didn't know how to maintain it. This is where patience finally snapped. For him, not me. A month after the initial presentation, Greg missed a major deadline for expanding the system to another department. The executive team called an emergency meeting, and this time, they didn't just want Greg. They wanted the whole team involved in the project, which meant they wanted me. I walked into that conference room with my folder of documentation. Greg was already there, looking stressed, trying to explain why the rollout had stalled. The executives were not happy. They asked direct questions about the system's architecture, about implementation challenges, about scalability. Greg gave vague, buzzwordy answers that didn't actually mean anything. Then one of the executives turned to me and asked if I had any insight, since I'd been part of the development process. I didn't jump in immediately. I let Greg try to answer first. He fumbled, contradicted himself, clearly had no idea what he was talking about. The executive asked me again, more directly this time, so I calmly explained the entire system, how it worked, why I'd designed it the way I had, what the challenges were, how to address them. I spoke clearly and confidently because I knew every piece of it. I'd built it. The executive started asking me follow-up questions, and I answered all of them. I could see Greg's face getting redder, but he stayed quiet. Then one of the executives asked who had actually developed the system, because it was becoming clear Greg didn't understand it at the level I did. I pulled out my documentation, emails dated months before Greg's presentation, showing me pitching the idea, draft proposals with my name on them, test results I'd run, feedback I'd gathered, and most damning, an email where Greg had explicitly thanked me for my work on the system just days before he presented it as his own to leadership. The room went silent. One of the executives asked Greg if he'd like to explain. He tried to backtrack, said there'd been a miscommunication, that he'd always intended to give me credit, but the presentation had been rushed. I didn't say anything. I just let the evidence speak for itself. The meeting ended shortly after, and I was asked to stay behind while Greg was dismissed. The executives apologized. They said they should have asked more questions, should have looked into who was actually doing the work. They asked if I'd be willing to take over the rollout and expansion of the system. I said yes, but only if it came with appropriate recognition and compensation. They agreed. 2 weeks later, I was promoted into Greg's role. He was demoted to a position with no direct reports and no project ownership. Greg tried to paint himself as the victim, said I'd sabotaged him by withholding information, but too many people had seen what happened. Too many people knew he'd taken credit for work that wasn't his. His reputation was destroyed, and honestly, he did it to himself. I didn't have to sabotage him. I just had to stop covering for his incompetence. I learned something important from that experience. Silence can be powerful, not speaking up immediately, not jumping in to save someone who's taking credit for your work, letting them fail on their own. It's hard to do, especially when you're watching something you built fall apart. But sometimes people need to be exposed by their own actions, not by your accusations. Greg exposed himself the moment he had to actually explain work he didn't understand. I just made sure the right people were watching when it happened. Silence can be powerful, but what about when staying silent protects people who don't deserve it? I kept a secret for 5 years that nearly destroyed me. My cousin Brian stole $60,000 from our grandmother's estate and blamed it on my late father. My dad had been gone for 2 years when it happened, and he couldn't defend himself. Brian was the one managing Grandma's finances, had power of attorney, all of it. He had access to everything, and he used that access to drain money from her accounts for his own business ventures that had gone under. When the family discovered the missing money, Brian pointed the finger at my dad. He said Dad had been borrowing from Grandma before he died, that he'd never paid it back, that the missing funds were from loans that were never documented properly. It was a complete lie, but it was convenient. My dad wasn't around to deny it, and Brian had manipulated the records enough that it looked plausible if you didn't dig too deep. I knew the truth because Brian had told me, not as a confession, but as a justification. He'd come to me a few months after the theft, stressed and panicking, and told me what he'd done. He said his business was failing, that he'd lose everything if he didn't get an infusion of cash, and that Grandma had so much money she'd never miss it. He said he'd pay it back before anyone noticed. He never did. And when the accountant caught the discrepancy during a routine review, Brian spun his story and everyone believed him. I wanted to speak up. I wanted to tell the family what Brian had actually done. But my grandmother was 87 years old and in declining health. She'd already lost her son, my father, and the idea that he'd stolen from her was breaking her heart. I didn't want to add to her pain by revealing that her grandson, someone she trusted completely, had actually been the one to betray her. So I stayed quiet. I thought I was protecting her. I thought the truth could wait until she was gone, and then I'd set the record straight. But Brian didn't stop at framing my dad. Over the next few years, he kept working on my grandmother, slowly turning her against me. He'd make comments about how I didn't visit enough, how I only called when I needed something, how I'd been distant ever since my dad died. None of it was true, but Grandma's memory was fading, and Brian was there constantly, reinforcing his narrative. I could see her growing colder toward me, but I didn't realize how far it had gone until she passed away. The will reading was brutal. I expected to be left something, not because I wanted money, but because I'd always been close to my grandmother. Instead, I got nothing. Everything went to Brian and a few other cousins. The lawyer explained that there'd been a revision to the will 6 months before her death. In the revision, my grandmother had specifically disinherited me, stating that I'd been financially exploiting her in her final years, that I'd been stealing from her, that she no longer trusted me and wanted to ensure I received nothing from her estate. I sat there in that office, numb. Brian had convinced our dying grandmother that I was the thief. He'd manipulated her into cutting me out of the will completely, and the whole family was looking at me like I was some kind of monster. My aunts wouldn't even make eye contact. My cousins whispered to each other. I tried to explain that it wasn't true, that I'd never taken anything from Grandma, but no one wanted to hear it. They believed what was written in the will, and they believed Brian. Then came the breaking point. At the reception after the funeral, Brian made a speech. He talked about how hard it had been watching Grandma decline, how painful it was to see family members take advantage of her. He didn't say my name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. He said he was grateful he'd been there to protect her in her final years, to make sure the right people were taken care of in the end. People actually clapped. They thanked him for being such a devoted grandson. I felt sick. I left early. I went home, and I made a decision. I was done protecting people who didn't deserve it. I pulled out every piece of documentation I had, bank records showing exactly when the money had been taken and from which accounts, legal documents proving my father had never had access to those accounts after a certain date, emails between Brian and his failed business partners discussing the money he'd borrowed, and the recording. The one I'd made 5 years earlier when Brian had first confessed to me. I'd recorded it on my phone during that conversation, not because I planned to use it, but because I wanted protection. I wanted proof in case he ever tried to turn things around on me. I'd kept it all this time, hoping I'd never need it, but now I did. I had his voice admitting he'd stolen the money, explaining how he'd covered it up, laughing about how easy it was to blame my dead father. The recording was 18 minutes long, and it was damning. I didn't go to the family first. I went to a lawyer. I explained the situation, showed them everything I had, and asked about contesting the will. They said I had a case, a strong one. Not only was the will based on false information, but there was evidence of elder abuse and fraud. Brian had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman for financial gain. That was illegal, regardless of family dynamics. We filed the contest. Brian tried to fight it, said I was being vindictive, that I was a liar. But when my lawyer released the evidence during the legal proceedings, Everything fell apart. The bank records were irrefutable. The timeline didn't match Brian's story, and the recording played in front of a judge destroyed any credibility he had left. The family heard about it before the trial even concluded. My lawyer had sent copies of the key evidence to everyone named in the will, as part of the legal disclosure process. My aunts called me. My cousins reached out. They were horrified. They said they'd had no idea that Brian had seemed so trustworthy that they couldn't believe he'd done this. Some of them apologized. Some of them didn't. Some of them just went quiet, probably embarrassed they'd believed his lies so easily. The will was overturned. I inherited what my grandmother had originally intended for me before Brian poisoned her against me. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about clearing my name and my father's name. It was about making sure the truth was finally out there after 5 years of letting people believe a lie. Brian is facing criminal charges now: fraud, theft, elder financial abuse. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution wasn't interested. The evidence is too solid. He's looking at serious jail time, and he did it all to himself. He could have just asked for help when his business was failing. He could have been honest. Instead, he stole, lied, framed a dead man, manipulated an elderly woman, and tried to destroy my reputation to cover it all up. I've cut off most of my family. The ones who apologized, I've kept at a distance. The ones who didn't, I don't talk to at all. I can't trust people who are so quick to believe the worst about me without asking a single question. They chose Brian's lies over giving me the benefit of the doubt, and that's not something I can just forget. I learned something through all of this. Staying quiet to protect people doesn't always work out the way you think it will. I thought I was being kind by not exposing Brian while my grandmother was alive, but all I did was give him more time to manipulate her and destroy my relationship with her. If I'd spoken up sooner, maybe things would have been different. Maybe she would have known the truth before she died. That's something I'll have to live with. But I also learned that the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It might take years. It might cost you more than you expected. But eventually it comes out. And when it does, the people who lied have nowhere left to hide. Protecting others can destroy you, but so can defending the people who hurt you most. I grew up in a house where I learned to make myself small. My stepfather moved in when I was 8, and from that moment on, everything changed. He wasn't physically violent, but he didn't need to be. He had other ways of making me feel worthless. He'd criticize everything I did, mock me in front of family, tell me I was stupid or lazy or ungrateful. When I cried, he'd tell me I was too sensitive. When I got quiet, he'd say I was being manipulative. There was no winning. My mother saw it happening but never intervened. She'd tell me later in private that I just needed to try harder to get along with him, that he was stressed, that I was making things difficult. My older brother Jason saw everything. He was there for all of it. The comments at dinner, the public humiliation, the way my stepfather would gaslight me into thinking I'd imagined slights that had absolutely happened. Jason never said anything to defend me in the moment. Afterward, he'd pull me aside and tell me to let it go, to keep the peace. He'd say that making waves would just upset Mom, and wasn't it better to just stay quiet and get through it? I believed him for a long time. I thought maybe he was right, that keeping the family together was more important than how I felt. I moved out the day I turned 18 and slowly started to distance myself from my stepfather. It took years of therapy to even start unpacking what I'd been through, to stop blaming myself for the way he'd treated me. Eventually, I decided to go no contact with him entirely. I told my mother I loved her, but I wouldn't be attending any family events if he was there. She was hurt, said I was being unfair, but I held firm. It was the healthiest boundary I'd ever set. Jason didn't support it. He called me and said I was being dramatic, that our stepfather wasn't that bad, that I was holding grudges over things that had happened years ago. I tried to explain that it wasn't about holding grudges. It was about protecting myself from someone who'd spent a decade tearing me down. He didn't want to hear it. He said I was making everything harder for Mom, that I was being selfish. Then came a family gathering I didn't attend because my stepfather would be there. Jason was there, and apparently someone asked where I was. According to my cousin who called me afterward, Jason went on this whole rant about how I was ungrateful and overdramatic, how our stepfather had provided for me, and I was repaying him by cutting him out of my life over nothing. He painted me as this spoiled, bitter person who couldn't let go of the past. People at the gathering apparently nodded along, agreed with him, said it was sad that I was tearing the family apart. I was done. I'd spent years staying quiet, keeping the peace, protecting everyone's comfort at the expense of my own well-being. And now Jason was publicly trashing me to justify his own complicity in what I'd been through. So I stopped protecting him. Years ago, when I was 16, my stepfather got a DUI. He'd been driving drunk and crashed into a fence. No one was hurt, but he could have killed someone. He called Jason to come get him before the cops showed up. Jason did. He drove him home, helped him come up with a story about the car being stolen, and they reported it to the police the next day. The insurance paid out. My stepfather never faced consequences. I knew about it because I'd overheard them talking, and later I found text messages on Jason's old phone that he'd left at home when he upgraded. Messages between him and my stepfather discussing the whole cover-up. I'd taken screenshots years ago, not knowing if I'd ever need them, just knowing that it felt important to have proof of who these people really were. I posted those screenshots on Facebook. I didn't write a novel, didn't go into detail about the abuse I'd suffered. I just said that since my brother wanted to publicly call me dramatic and ungrateful, I thought the family should know about the time he helped our stepfather cover up a DUI that could have killed someone. I tagged both of them and let the evidence speak for itself. The response was immediate. My mother called me, crying, asking if it was true. I told her it was. She said she'd had no idea. I told her that was the problem. She'd had no idea about a lot of things because everyone around her was more interested in keeping the peace than telling the truth. She finally asked me about the abuse. And for the first time in my life, she actually listened. She didn't defend him. She didn't make excuses. She just listened and then said she was sorry. It didn't fix everything, but it was something. Jason called me too. He was furious. He said I'd had no right to our family business like that I'd humiliated him and our stepfather, that I'd destroyed the family. I told him he'd destroyed it years ago when he chose to protect an abuser instead of his sister. He said the DUI had nothing to do with how our stepfather treated me. I said it had everything to do with it. It showed a pattern, a man who faced no consequences for dangerous behavior because the people around him covered for him. Jason helped establish that pattern, and then he stood by while that same man spent years tearing me down. He tried to get me to take the post down. I refused. He tried to say I doctored the screenshots. Several family members asked him directly if it was true, and he couldn't lie convincingly enough. My stepfather tried to downplay it, said it was a mistake from years ago, and that everyone deserved forgiveness. I commented on his post asking if he'd ever apologized to me for years of emotional abuse, or if forgiveness was only for him. Things went from bad to unhinged. Jason was ostracized by both sides of the family. Our mum's side was horrified by the cover-up. Our dad's side, who'd always suspected my stepfather was awful, felt vindicated and angry that Jason had enabled him. Jason tried to paint himself as the victim, said I'd set him up, that I'd been holding on to this information just waiting to use it against him, which, in a way, was true. I had been waiting for the moment when staying silent would hurt me more than speaking up. My mother left my stepfather 3 months later. She said she couldn't unsee what I'd shown her, couldn't unhear the things I'd told her about my childhood. She said she was sorry for not protecting me, for choosing him over me, for letting Jason convince her that I was the problem. She's in therapy now too. We talk sometimes. It's not perfect, but it's more honest than it's ever been. Jason and I haven't spoken since. He sent me one final message saying I'd ruined his life over something that had nothing to do with me. I didn't respond. His life isn't ruined. He's just facing consequences for the first time, and he can't handle it. He's still in contact with my stepfather, still defending him, still convinced that I'm the villain in this story. I feel vindicated, but I also feel deeply sad. I didn't want to destroy my relationship with my brother. I wanted him to acknowledge what had happened, to take responsibility for his part in it, to stand by me for once. But he couldn't do that, so I made sure everyone else knew the truth. Healing requires honesty, even when it destroys what's left. I'm in trauma therapy, working through decades of conditioning that taught me to stay small and quiet. I'm learning that my voice matters, that my truth matters, that protecting abusers to keep the peace isn't noble. It's just another form of abuse. I don't regret what I did. I regret that it had to come to that. but I'm done protecting people who never protected me. If you've made it this far into the chaos, I appreciate you sticking with me through these 15 stories of betrayal, receipts, and hard-won justice. These stories remind us that sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just makes sure the right people are held accountable. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, keep your receipts, trust your gut, and never let anyone gaslight you into silence. I'll see you in the next one with more drama, more twists, and more proof that reality is stranger than fiction. Sleep well.